It's a pleasure to follow Dick Riley. Not that easy though. Um, he's not only a South Carolina hero, but he's a according to just a litany of pundits and correspondents and Washington policymakers, is a national hero. And you begin to look at why. His track records on education, economic development, creative initiatives such as the South Carolina Research Authority, the Educational Improvement Act, South Carolina Improvement Council, School Improvement Councils, leadership programs, leadership in the art. It's simply amazing when you begin to look at it. A developer of all the infrastructures of opportunity that came about during that period, Governor Dick Riley. Well, good afternoon. It really is good to see you. Happy Warriors. Is that what you and Jackie call everybody? Actually, looking from here without my glasses on, you look like Happy Warriors. So anyway, full disclosure though for a moment, you've seen me kind of being tentative as I walk and came up the stage. I had a battle with a root, the root 1. And I'm on a number of interesting medications which kind of act as a verbal autocorrect for me at times. And so bear with me on this. It's extremely important, though, as we begin, to talk about, just for a second, about the sponsors who make this possible. One South Carolina is made possible by the Mayville Foundation, by Total Wines and More, by the Electric Cooperatives of South Carolina and TD Bank. And what we want you to do is we want you to add a TD Bank account to your portfolio. And we want you to go ahead and turn your lights and heat on and thank one of the 20 electric cooperatives around the state of South Carolina. And then we want you to celebrate all this with glasses of wine, total glasses of wine. Well, as you know, One South Carolina focuses on real-world problems. Problems that so many of our citizens, that keep so many of our citizens from being part of the social and economic mainstream and restrict our ability to compete in the global economy. And as Riley Fellows, you're armed with the skills, the frames of reference, the case studies, the understandings and experiences that position you to have a very real impact on this state. In previous gatherings of One South Carolina, we focused on the impact of poverty on education, on health, the impact of poverty on justice, and on economic development. And we looked at the differences in income and education that divide us into two South Carolinas. One group that's able to take advantage of what our state can offer, the other often living without the basic necessities of life or barely above the poverty line, just one crisis away from being unable to pay for medicine or transportation or utilities. And then we looked at how just raising the high school graduation rate by 5% or the college graduation rate by 1% would bring millions and millions of dollars in the economy and take large numbers of people off of social services. By creating conditions for South Carolinians to move out of poverty into the middle class, we're capitalizing on the most important asset that we have in this state, which is the people of South Carolina. At One South Carolina 2016, we're going to talk about how we can move people out of poverty into the middle class and how we can grow and sustain a very vibrant middle class. Tomorrow, we're going to examine 3 pathways to middle class jobs. First, through holistic community development and revitalization. Secondly, through relevant, focused partnerships between employers and educators. And third, through entrepreneurship. And on Sunday, we're going to look at the necessary physical foundations, roads, railways, shipping channels, and all of those things that make the 3 things that we've talked about before possible. But what is the middle class? And why is growing and sustaining a middle class so important to this state, or any other state for that matter? A Pew Research study completed in 2014 defined middle class as households living on 2/3 of the median income of Americans to twice the median income of Americans, 2/3 to twice. For an American family of 3 in 2014, the range of middle class would be from $42,000 to about $126,000. If you apply that definition, that same definition to South Carolina, we find wide variations of what middle class is in the state, depending on where one lives. For instance, in Greenville County, the range is about $33,000 to $100,000, but for Allendale, it's about $28,000 to $51,000. Now, these are aggregate figures, and they're kind of interesting, but they really don't tell us what we need to know. We need to know a good bit more, what the real impact of the recession, for instance, has been on our people and on the economy, and where being on poverty actually ends and having enough income to live comfortably and safely, where that begins, and what it takes for an individual or family to have enough money not to be poor. This really involves two sets of calculations for what is poor. One has to do with the federal poverty guidelines that were developed 5 decades ago and paid more attention to food costs than anything else. And these FPLs, these federal poverty lines, are still guiding federal policy as we speak. The more important set of calculations sets out what it actually takes for an individual or family to be self-sufficient and beyond, to be able to have enough resources to be able to escape poverty, to have enough money for food, for housing, for proper health, education, emergency funds, and even to save for retirement. In essence, to be able to be productive citizens that add to our resources, to be assets that actually drive the economy of South Carolina rather than pulls money out of it. Now, to understand the difference between the federal poverty lines and the realities that for life of South Carolinians, for a more database, real-world understanding of what it takes to be middle class, we're going to hear later on from Tim Ervelina, the president of United Way of South Carolina. But before Tim talks, let's look at where South Carolina is at the beginning of this beautiful spring that's coming up in 2016. What the impact of the recession actually was on our people and what it was on the economy in the aftermath of all this. At first glance, I'm sorry about this breathing mechanism we're having here. At first glance, our future really does look bright. Officially, the long recession is over. Unemployment is down nationally. It's down here at home. In fact, the Commerce Department issues new press releases almost daily about new manufacturing companies such as Volvo coming to South Carolina, or expansions at Michelin or BMW or Daimler, Boeing, and other large cap companies, or secondary suppliers, particularly from the aviation and automobile sectors. Well, these companies, no doubt, really do bring in well-paying jobs to the state. There's no doubt our economy is being strengthened due to manufacturing growth. And from this perspective, actually, it looks like we have recovered. The economy is growing in the aggregate, though, folks, with income numbers being pushed up by good jobs for better educated and those in the upper middle and upper income tiers. And what is hidden in these announcements of lower unemployment levels and the addition and expansion of all of our great companies is this. During the Great Recession, a large number of South Carolinians lost jobs that paid pretty well, with income levels that placed them solidly in the middle class. And then, as the recession officially ended, for a variety of reasons, many of these jobs were no longer available to them, and a remarkably high number of our workforce had to take lower paying jobs, many of those paying substantially less than what they were paid before. So under those circumstances, many South Carolinians dropped from middle class into poverty. For a substantial additional number of middle class people, they dropped into lower levels of middle class, creating conditions that kept children from being able to go to college or lowering their ability to buy consumer items, basically eliminated any emergency funds they may have. It's going to be made clear as we move forward, a large number of South Carolinians would find employment only in one of 10 of the most common occupations in the state. You probably didn't know this, but 40% of all South Carolina's workforce are employed in one of 10 occupations. And 9 of those 10 occupations actually don't pay enough for sufficiently for a family to be supported by an individual. One of the most important indicators of what happened in our state measures the number of South Carolinians dropping out of the middle class between 2000 and 2014. The Pew Research Center found a substantial shift downward in middle class households. During this really short period, South Carolina's middle class dropped substantially. In fact, among all southern states, Pew found that South Carolina lost the largest share of middle class. By 2014, only 45.8% of households in South Carolina had incomes high enough to be called middle class. That's the lowest of any southern state. Of the 1.85 million households estimated for South Carolina in 2015, 100,000 households had dropped from the middle class into poverty during the period. And if you look at this, considering that each household in the state averages about 2.5 people, what that really means is this: 250,000 South Carolinians slipped into poverty during the period. More specifically, in their 2015 State of the South report, the MDC Research Group found that between 2000 and 2012, the increase in the number of people of poverty in Charleston was 33%. It was 42.4% in in Columbia, and in Greenville it was all the way up to 63% of additional people in poverty. And that's in our metropolitan areas. In our rural areas, the estimates, I don't have them in front of me, they're greater. So that despite the vitality and the growth of the manufacturing base, middle class in South Carolina is shrinking. And why is this a problem? What is it about being middle class that is so important, so actually extremely important for the future of this state? Here are the 5 main reasons that the middle class matters, and it matters a lot. 5 main reasons the middle class is essential to the economy and for social well-being, to the country, to our state, particularly to a low-resource state like South Carolina. These reasons are really pretty obvious. When you think about it, there's just common sense. And they're also so obvious that we've got politicians on both sides of the aisle wondering about ways to build up the middle class. First, number 1, consumer spending drives economic growth. The spending power of the middle class, with their ability to purchase consumer items beyond basic necessities, is the key to growth of manufacturing. From spending on consumer items from clothing to automobiles, houses to appliances, books, recreational equipment, the widest range of consumer items. Really is a large and vibrant middle class that drives the American economy, and certainly ours in this state. Secondly, it fosters entrepreneurs. It really is the middle class that does that, because you've got to have a middle class that has money to pay for education, to build household wealth, resources to absorb the risk that allows entrepreneurs to flourish and small businesses to be started. It incubates entrepreneurs because it offers a good combination of time, of resources, and motivation to invest in skills and to climb the innovation ladder. Third, increases investment in education and infrastructure. It's only with a large and vibrant middle class that you get this infrastructure development being demanded and acquired. Also, not only physical infrastructure, but also human capital through education. It creates stability. A broad and vibrant middle class demands stable. It keeps demand stable and it keeps demand steady. It stabilizes and protects economic investments by businesses and other organizations. It protects their capital investment. Officials from JCPenney, when they were asked about the risk of their stock value over the last few years, where the company's in-house sales had dropped 9 to 15%, this in 2013, they said, it's our core customer, the moderate consumer, we're losing them. The moderate consumer, the middle class, has dropped in the past several years. And finally, and this is important, it's extremely important to democracy. If you're going to have a democracy, you have to have time to be, and actually in many ways the resources to engage yourselves in civic and circumstances, become involved civically, for broad participation in the life of communities, and for good government. The resources available to middle-class citizens allow time to be involved, time to invest in the community, to educate themselves in what really works, and time to collaborate with others on projects that promote the common good. In other words, the middle class helps build and sustain community, and quite frankly, democracy itself. One South Carolina is an in-depth exploration of how we recapture, build, and sustain the economic engine as necessary to the future of this low-resource state. It's also a way to understand how we build a robust infrastructure of opportunities for the most important asset we have, or any state has, or any country has, and that's its people. 2 years ago, I talked about 1 million engines, and I was talking about the full investment in education to make sure that all 1 million kids that were in public education in South Carolina were educated, and the impact that would have on moving our state forward. And we're looking for that robust infrastructure of opportunities that includes education and a wide variety of things that we're going to approach.